And so we make it go and we keep it together and keep it moving. And I realize now that that's why we bore the audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, you all know that we tend to play music slower than usual. As for instance, the most famous melody ever composed that you hear now played in the background, that's part of our recording of the Ninth Symphony in whole beat. And if you didn't know that we play all music rather slow compared to the standard of today, you must be new to this channel. So welcome. Why do we play everything slower? Because we strongly think that back in the days of Beethoven, Chopin, Schumann, Mendelssohn, in the majority of the 19th century, that composers and musicians used the metronome in a different way as we do today. They didn't correlate the note value in the metronome mark with each click of the metronome, but with each other click. As we still do today, we teach our kids to learn the duration of a quarter note by 1 and
4, 5, 6, 7.
Yes, we even claim that that way of playing is authentic, at least that tempo, the result of this practice of the metronome, which we call the whole beat metronome practice, that is an authentic way of approaching the music of that time. And that's a bold claim because it changes so much. And oftentimes, I have to say, you all know that people will say like, listen, but if you play it like that, your audience will just fall asleep. Or worse, singers and wind players who would participate in a recording like that or in a performance like that, they will simply suffocate because they don't have enough breath to hold those long notes. Well, as a side note, I can just inform you that the 4 singers who participated at the recording of the Ninth Symphony are alive and feeling better than ever. And by the way, the reverse is true, because the remark we got from the singers during the recording and during the rehearsals of the Ninth Symphony in whole beat was that finally they got time to breathe, because that happens when you play a little bit slower, you get time to breathe. But it's true that from the established circle, so to say, there is a kind of hesitance to go along with this new way of seeing. It's a paradigm shift, for sure, and there is a lot to say about this. That all will go into the book that we are working very hard to finish. It's an incredible effort to do. I cannot underline that enough. And I know I have announced that book time after time again, but we want to make sure that when that book is going to be published, that it will be the best book ever written about this idea. And it definitely will. And there you will find all the sources, well, many sources, enough evidence. We will go back to the 15th century even. So that will be 500 years of music history written and described from a completely new perspective. Yeah, paradigm shift. We will use that even in our subtitle. But sometimes you come along a very famous musician, like for instance Leonard Bernstein, that gave an interview and talks about his experience with certain types of music. Like for instance in this case, the video excerpt I'm going to share with you, he talks about his experiences with Wagner. Tristan. It is probably not the most known interview given by Bernstein, but it's fantastic. It's just, you have to watch the original footage because it will be one of the best hours of your YouTube life. I can promise you that. Now, in this video, he talks about his roots, his connection with famous conductors, and of course, he's bragging a little bit of having known these people, and obviously they all agreed with him and they thought he was the best conductor ever. There is always this element of Bernsteinish that you have to keep in mind when you watch his or when you listen to him talking. But what he says about his experience with Wagner, that's a very rare statement, because he goes against all the tradition of his time. He goes into, not tradition, he goes in against all the trends of his time. So Basically what he's saying, he played the introduction, the prelude to Tristan much slower than is usually done. There are a few lessons that we can apply to our way of playing. It's very similar to what we experience, what Bernstein, of all conductors, experienced when he was playing or conducting Wagner, and the way he thought that was authentic. So let's listen to a first fragment in which you will hear Bernstein say that during the rehearsal, when Karl Böhme was actually in the hall listening, the famous conductor, that he got a word from his sound manager with the question if he could not speed things up. Let's listen.
At the end of this morning thing, I was sitting there sort of in the doldrums, and I was sitting alone at the podium trying to think where we went wrong and where I could do better. And I see this man bounding down like a young goat from the aisle, and he came up to the stage, to the podium, and it was Karl Böhme. Eyes ablaze, cheeks aflame, a young man. And he had been there indeed for the whole rehearsal. No 20 minutes, 93 and a half minutes it takes me for the first act. And he said, Leonard Bernstein, endlich habe ich zum ersten Mal Tristan gehört in meinem Leben. That's full wrong word order. He said,
I will translate.
He said, zum ersten Mal in meinem Leben habe ich Tristan endlich gehört.
Finally, Bernstein, for the first time in my life, I am hearing Tristan.
And I fell right down.
The man who thought he owned it.
And I was sort of kneeling on the podium because this man was way down there, and I was in this awful position toward this great dying maestro. I was speechless. I didn't know what to say. Paralyzed. All I could think of was that before the rehearsal, John McClure, my sound man, had said to me, please, Lenny, isn't there something you can do about the prelude? We're dying there in the control room. It's so slow. It's 15 minutes you take for the prelude. Böhme does it in 10. Now, between 10 and 15 is a pretty...
You shouldn't.
And I said, look, you do your job and I'll do my job. I do it slow. I do what I think Wagner wrote. So all I could think to say to Böhme was, this was in my head from John McClure, was auch das Vorspiel, also the prelude. You mean you even like the prelude? He said, überhaupt das Vorspiel.
And then we come to a magical moment in the interview. You have to maybe listen to it a few times and think of it while listening. Replace the name of Wagner by Beethoven, and you will get a shock. Let's listen.
We Europeans don't dare to play Wagner the way Wagner wrote it.
It's an incredible thing to hear from this man. Not Scholti, not Karajan, not Kleiber, not me.
Imagine.
Because we're afraid of boring the audience. Langweilig. Das Publikum zu langweiligen. And so we make it go, and we keep it together and keep it moving. And I realize now that that's why we bore the audience. That's the most boring thing in the world. Because, and that I must say, I heard Jimmy Levine do at the Met in that tradition, and I had to run after the first act. I couldn't stay in the place, and I love Jimmy. He's my disciple and my baby, and he learned to my knee. I couldn't sit in that hall, because he learned just this. Get rid of it as fast as possible not to bore the public, and there's no firmer guarantee of boring the public than that.
You know, the
Don't make one event, you don't make one thing come true, come clear, because you're too busy going on to the next.
We are afraid for our audience. Get it done, speed it up. So let's move forward. You know what happens? It's exactly what Bernstein says. When you speed it up so much, you don't have the time anymore. Do not stand still, but to highlight a certain element of beauty. And the result of that is the audience will get bored because you skip so many details. And the strange thing, or the funny thing, or the funniest thing of all is that was true for the 19th century musicians as well. There was so many sources in that time that actually warned people, musicians, conductors, like, "Yeah, guys, it wasn't like that in the Vienna of Beethoven. Why are we speeding that music so much up? If you want to show your fast fingers, use other music, but not Beethoven's sonatas." Of course, those voices were conservative and they didn't make it. I mean, they lost the battle. Bernstein continues explaining the effect on the audience. He talks about this 8 beats rest that he thinks none of his colleagues actually dare to count in full because they are afraid, again, of their audiences. But he explains why you should do that and what the effect on the audience is. And in general, I can say that's the effect that playing in whole beat, once you master that language, you have to learn to play, to understand that language. There's a different way of accentuation, there's a different touch, there's a different listening experience even. And that's actually what Bernstein also is telling us in this video. Let's listen.
You know, the marking in the Mottl edition of the Tristan prelude constantly says, "Nicht eilen, don't hurry." But that's largely ignored.
Well, start with the prelude. Langsam und schmachtend. Slow and longing, yearning.
Yeah.
Schmacht.
My shoulders come
Now,
up.
he writes, yeah,
Which should take forever.
should take, and that chord, and then there are 8 rests, 8 beats of rest at this tempo.
And you wait.
No one I've ever heard just do them, wait that long. No one. I do, and the audience thinks I've died. Literally, they get very nervous and this kind of squirming, or they think I've forgotten what the next phrase is, or something was supposed to happen that didn't happen. Then you do the second phrase, and the audience, you hear a sigh of relief, actually. When I finally got to do it, you could hear the audience say, "Oh, thank God he didn't die." And you do the second phrase, and then there's another long pause, not quite so long as the first. And they begin to get the idea. And by the third phrase, you've got them in this other time warp place, I mean, this other planet, or you haven't. If you haven't, then don't do the rest of the opera, forget it.
And then finally, for this excerpt, he talks about the Tristan chord, the Wagner chord, that at the end, I don't know the score very well, but is actually lengthened at the climax of the piece. And there he actually reverses the idea of singers or wind players will suffocate.
Somebody timed the length of that chord, the chord,
The chord, the Tristan
chord,
chord.
when they drink.
Yes.
And they do,
Yeah.
so whole orchestra, then everybody drops out except the winds, the 4 winds. Now somebody timed that on my performance. It was 25 seconds, in which an oboe player has to blow all his might and diminish, and then hold it, pianissimo, and then diminish on the rest of the phrase.
I want to ask you,
it's almost impossible.
So 25 seconds for the wind players. I mean, they can do that. But I promised you a little twist of the story. That's another Bernstein. It's a Bernstein that actually falls into the trap of what he described just in the other interview to be like being afraid of the audience. He's conducting das Lied von der Erde of Mahler in a tempo that the mezzo-soprano Christa Ludwig does not agree with. And she doesn't agree with the tempo for a very serious reason. Let's listen.
This is so much slower than I ever do it. The inner Schnelle comes here. We haven't even come to that. Okay, before 14, please. 5 bars. La, 3, 4.
Seinen wir fröhlich auf und schultern so sind wir oben Gräser machen, die Hufe sind zerstampfen, jeden Sturm die Hieb gesunden Nüstern, ein Schatten im Taubel seine Mäden danken
It doesn't matter, nobody knows, who can hear the words anyway.
Christa Ludwig actually said, but I cannot sing the words. The answer of Bernstein is, who cares? Nobody can understand the words anyways. He comes there to a moment where he has to make the decision, am I going slower to give my singer the time to breathe and to pronounce the words? And he decides not to do that, saying like, nobody cares about the words, nobody understands the words, so why would we pay attention to that? So, afraid of the audience here, Mr. Bernstein? I don't know. He wouldn't agree to me saying that, and I wouldn't. Well, I think I would have the courage to say that to him, but not in these words. I have too much respect for this guy. This is like an incredibly fascinating personality and like a great musician. When I feature Bernstein here, at one hand you could say, yeah, you use him to prove your own point, and then you use him to prove your own point in a negative way. No, I don't do that. I just bring to you two expressions from the same man in the hope that you will see that it's never black and white. The Wagner fragment gives us a unique insight in what happens when someone thinks outside of his own personal taste or saw something or felt something that connected to something that he wants to defend, which then as a result, whether Bernstein connects it to authenticity or not, but I connected to authenticity. We made some Glenn Gould videos where also Glenn Gould was not thinking like, let's be authentic now in the Hammerklavier Sonata or the Appassionata of Beethoven, the Mozart alla Turca and Brahms concerto. He wasn't thinking that, but by instinct they come there. But yet they go on stage with another piece here, Mahler, and they forgot about that. So there is no real trigger of authenticity, no real desire to go back in time. Of course not with Bernstein. I think it was an authority argument. It was something that he wanted to, like, with his dramatic way of saying and expressing, like he had so much charisma. He was able to do that. And people thought like, yeah, this guy really cares about the original idea of the composer. He didn't. I'm pretty sure he didn't, but he used that. He abused that. But I'm using that here to say like, that's so true. What happens then when you are there? when you allow that message to penetrate, to come through, what happens with the audience is fantastic, is fabulous. Is this a piece of evidence? No. I just wanted to make you aware of this way of thinking. This is so similar to what happened when you play in whole beat. You will experience the same things. You just have to have the courage. The other day I was talking to a piano teacher, a conservatory piano teacher in Spain, saying the same thing. Like, when I'm on stage, I play whole beat all the time. But when I'm on stage, I want to go a little faster, 4 or 5 clicks on the metronome. And I said, why? Yeah, but the audience expects that. It's just you have to have the courage from the first note to do that. And when you do it right, when you understand the language, and when you don't care about the audience reaction, they will be just stunned. There will be a silence in the room. Like, of course, I didn't witness it with an orchestra, but I would love to, by the way. And that would be a difficult exercise because the orchestra will have to learn to play in that way, make long notes, make different accents, and then things like that. Let's not go into details, but I'm sure that the audience would just adore this way of playing, and there would be no way back. Sure of that. Hope you are sure of that as well. Enough, at least, to check out our 9 symphony recordings. Guys, we are now 14th of May. I'm recording this video. The boxes will arrive around the 1st or 2nd week of June 24. When you watch this video much later in the future, they will already be here. The link will be in the description box. We're going to do something special when we launch the release, the official release of the physical boxes. They will be there. And so stay tuned because you don't want to miss that. I'm saying that now, but we don't know what we're going to do yet. But we're going to do something special, that's for sure. Okay, that's enough for this video. I thank you for being here. I thank you for watching. And we see each other very soon again.